My daughter-in-law inherited $100 million the week we buried my son. The very first thing she did with her new fortune was look me in the eye, point to the door of the house he and I built together, and tell me I wasn't welcome there anymore. Her exact words were, "Go die in a dumpster." I picked up my old coat, stepped out into the rain, and made one phone call. 5 days later, that same woman was on her knees in front of me in a lawyer's office, begging for a single dollar and asking what went wrong. My son knew exactly who she was, and he wrote his will like a chess player planning 10 moves ahead. If you're listening to this, tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and hit like and subscribe if you believe that wisdom and patience are more powerful than anger. You're going to want to hear how this played out. When the front door closed behind me that day, I stood under the porch light for a moment just to steady myself. The rain had already soaked through my coat, dripping from the sleeves as I held my old suitcase by the handle. It wasn't heavy, just a few shirts, some books, and whatever she had decided was worth packing before throwing me out. I remember looking back at the house, the place my son and I had built nail by nail when he was a young man with more ambition than money. I had laid half those bricks myself. He had sanded the banister on the staircase. We'd built the library as a tribute to his mother, a room filled with warm oak shelves and the books she loved. Standing there in the rain, watching the lights glow through the windows of a house that used to feel like home, I realized how quickly someone's entire world can shift. One moment you're a father mourning his son, trying to hold on to whatever pieces of him remain, and the next you're a problem to be removed. She had made that clear. Chloe didn't yell when she said it. That's what stunned me the most. She wasn't hysterical or grieving. She spoke those words as calmly as if she were giving instructions to a contractor removing an old couch. "You're not welcome here anymore. Go die in a dumpster." Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors, and 2 men she'd hired moved toward me as if they were removing outdated furniture. They didn't shove me or drag me. They simply lifted my arms, placed me outside, set the suitcase beside me, and shut the door. A few seconds later, I heard the deadbolt lock. The sound echoed in my chest like a verdict. I didn't knock. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for another chance to stay in the home my son and I had once filled with laughter and sawdust and memories older than Chloe's entire personality. Instead, I took a slow breath and walked down the steps. My shoes splashed through shallow puddles forming on the stone walkway. It felt like the world had gone quiet, even though the rain was falling hard enough to blur the streetlights. I kept my head down and made it to the sidewalk before the weight of everything that had happened finally pressed down on me. People talk about heartbreak as if it's a metaphor, but that night it felt physical, like something inside me had cracked. Losing my son had already carved a hollow space in my chest. Getting thrown out of his house, our house, took whatever was left and stripped it bare. I stood beneath the branches of the old oak tree we planted together the year he got accepted into his engineering program. We dug the hole ourselves, sweating under the summer sun, laughing about how crooked the tree was leaning before we straightened it. Now it towered over me, tall and sturdy, while I felt like a man whose foundation had crumbled. But even in the middle of that despair, a quiet certainty settled into place. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. When the taxi pulled up, the driver didn't ask questions. He just took my suitcase, placed it in the trunk, and waited for directions. I gave him the name of a motel I remembered from years ago, a place out on the highway where nobody cared who you were or why you were checking in. Somewhere I could disappear without anyone asking if I was all right. The drive passed in a blur of blurred headlights and the rhythmic swipe of windshield wipers. The city looked different through rain-soaked glass, like a place that had forgotten me just as quickly as Chloe had. When we reached the motel, the neon sign flickered as if it were struggling to stay alive. It wasn't the kind of place anyone chose willingly, but tonight it was exactly what I needed. I checked in, took my key, and stepped inside a room that smelled faintly of old carpet and cheap air freshener. There was one dim lamp, one creaking bed, and one chair. Everything looked tired. Everything looked like me. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since Chloe had kicked me out, I let myself breathe. Slowly, deliberately. This was the moment where a weaker man might have let despair swallow him whole. But I had something she didn't know about, one thing she hadn't counted on. My son didn't just leave behind money or a company. He left behind a plan. And tonight, Chloe had triggered it without even realizing it. I took my phone out of my coat pocket. The screen lit up, glowing against the darkness of the room. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the one name I knew would change everything. Mr. Davies, my son's lawyer. A man who had known David almost as long as I had. A man who understood him in ways Chloe never bothered to try. My finger hovered over the call button for a moment. Not out of doubt, but out of respect. Calling Davies meant walking a path my son had prepared long before he died. It meant stepping into a game David had designed, trusting that he, even in death, knew exactly what he was doing. Finally, I pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice. Then I heard his voice, steady, calm, and filled with something I didn't recognize until later, relief. "Robert," he said quietly, "I was about to call you." And in that moment, sitting on a worn motel bed with rain tapping against the window, I understood one thing with complete clarity. My son had seen everything coming. Chloe's greed, her cruelty, her ambition. He had understood all of it. And he hadn't left me unprotected. This wasn't my breaking point. It was the first move in a game David had set in motion. And Chloe had already walked into the trap. Mr. Davies didn't sound surprised to hear from me. That was the first thing that told me my son had planned for this. His voice wasn't shocked or confused or fumbling for the right words. It was steady, controlled, like a man finally flipping to the right page in a folder he'd been waiting to open. "Robert," he said again, softer this time. "Where are you?" I looked around the small, tired room. Peeling wallpaper. The hum of the old air conditioner. The sound of a truck passing on the wet highway outside. "The Starlight Motel off the interstate," I said. "Chloe threw me out. She told me to get out of her house. Used a couple of words I won't repeat. I'm not welcome there anymore." There was a long exhale on the other end of the line, not surprised, just sad. "I was afraid of that," he murmured. "David was afraid of that too." I closed my eyes. "So he knew. He suspected," Mr. Davies said carefully. "Your son wasn't a man who ignored patterns, Robert. He saw who Chloe was, the way money changed her. But he also saw who he wanted to believe she could be. That's why the will you heard, what I read in the office, is only half the story." I sat up straighter on the bed, the mattress complaining under my weight. "What do you mean, half?" He shifted into the tone I knew from meetings and contracts, calm and precise. "When we read the will last week, you heard the basic distribution. Chloe as primary beneficiary of the company's shares, the investment accounts, the house, the liquid assets. What I didn't tell you then was that David attached a condition to that inheritance, a legal one. It wasn't just sentimental language. It was enforceable." "What condition?" I asked. "A fiduciary duty," he said. "In plain English, she wasn't just given the estate, she was trusted with it, for the good of the family and the legacy. There's a 30-day evaluation period written into the document. During those 30 days, she has a legal obligation to protect the welfare of the Peterson family and preserve David's legacy. Her behavior during that period decides whether the rest of his plan goes into effect." I let those words roll around my mind. 30 days. Family welfare. Legacy. "So when she threw me out, when she threw you out," he cut in gently, "she didn't just behave cruelly. She broke that duty in the clearest way possible. She removed the only other immediate family member from the home and told him to disappear. On day 2 of the evaluation period." He paused. "In legal terms, Robert, that's called a catastrophic breach." I stared at the stained motel ceiling. A catastrophic breach. To me, it had just felt like a broken heart and a slammed door. "Why didn't you tell me this when we read the will?" I asked quietly. "Because I wasn't allowed to," he said. David was very specific. He gave me 2 sets of instructions. The first was to read that main will exactly as written, with no commentary. The second was sealed, to be followed only if certain triggers occurred. I was bound to silence until those triggers were met. If Chloe had chosen differently, if she had treated you decently, kept you in the home, respected the legacy, I would never have opened that second file. David actually hoped that would happen. There was a warmth in his voice when he said that, a small sad smile I could hear but not see. He loved her in his own way, Robert, he added. He wanted to be wrong about her. "And now?" I asked. "Now," Mr. Davies said, his tone turning firm again, "she has made her choice. Which means I'm free to execute his." I felt something settle in my chest then, not joy, not revenge, but a strange kind of balance returning, like a picture that had been tilted finally being set straight. "So what did he do?" I asked. "What did he set up?" I heard the rustle of papers on his end. "David left behind a sealed codicil," he said. "A second document. It remains dormant unless I, as executor, certify that Chloe has failed the character test in those first 30 days. Your eviction, combined with the way she's already behaving with the money, is more than enough. Once I sign that certification, the codicil overrides the main will. Overrides. I repeated. Completely, he confirmed. The version of the will you heard becomes legally meaningless. The codicil becomes the true, controlling document. And Chloe goes from sole owner of everything to something very, very different. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. So that's why you didn't sound surprised? I said. You were waiting. I was hoping not to need it, he replied calmly. But yes, I was waiting. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The motel room felt less like a cell and more like a command center. I wasn't a man who had been discarded. I was a man being briefed. What do you need from me? I asked. There was a small pause. Then his answer came steady and clear. First, I'm going to need your written statement about what happened at the house. Exact words, dates, times. We'll treat it as a sworn affidavit. I'll send a courier to you tonight so you don't have to come in. Second, I need you to do something that will be harder than it sounds. What's that? Disappear, he said. At least for a few days. No phone calls. No visits. Don't go to mutual friends. Don't answer if she somehow manages to contact you. As far as Chloe is concerned, you're exactly what she thinks you are right now. A broken old man who quietly walked away. Your silence will make her feel safe. And when people like her feel safe, they stop pretending. I thought about that. About her standing in that big, empty house, laughing into the phone about being the sole owner. About the way she ripped my life up like a receipt she didn't need anymore. What will you be doing while I'm hiding in this motel? I asked. His tone shifted again, professional, almost clinical. My part is paperwork, he said. Very boring, very slow, very effective. I'll file to place temporary holds on all major estate accounts. I'll flag large outgoing transfers for review. I'll notify the bank that no properties are to be refinanced, sold, or structurally altered until probate is complete. All perfectly standard actions for an estate this size, especially with a tech company involved. You're going to freeze her out, I said quietly. Not forever, he replied. Just long enough for the codicil to wake up, and long enough for her to show us who she is when she thinks the world belongs to her. I imagined her walking through as many boutiques and dealerships as she could find, waving her inheritance around like a golden ticket. I imagined her plans to rip out the library, to turn David's sanctuary into some kind of showroom for her new life. Mr. Davies seemed to read my thoughts. David's words, not mine, he said. He told me, if she turns that house into a monument to herself, I want the law to remind her whose name built it. My throat tightened. He really said that? Yes, Davies said softly. And he also said this. Make sure my father has the final say, not her. He risked everything on me when I had nothing. That house exists because of him. I won't have him die feeling like a guest in it. The room blurred for a second, and I had to blink hard. I took a slow breath. All right, I said. Send me whatever you need signed. I'll stay put. I'll keep my phone off unless it's you calling. Good, he replied. And Robert? Yes. I know this doesn't erase what she did to you, he said gently. But I want you to understand something clearly. Your son did not abandon you. He didn't forget you. He trusted you with the final move. My eyes went to the suitcase by the door, still half open, my life folded up inside it. Then I looked at my own reflection in the dark TV screen. For the first time since I'd stepped out into that rain, I didn't see a man who had been thrown away. I saw a man who had been handed a job. Then I won't let him down, I said. After we hung up, I did the hardest thing Mr. Davies had asked of me. I held down the power button on my phone until the screen went black. No more checking. No more obsessing over what she might be doing. No more looking for the smallest sign of regret. The world went quiet. Out there, somewhere, Chloe was spending, bragging, planning, tearing down everything David and I built. In here, in a cheap motel room with a humming air conditioner and a sagging bed, I was waiting. Not as a victim, but as a witness. My son had set the board. Mr. Davies had the rules. And all I had to do was be patient. Wisdom and patience over anger. I finally understood what that really meant. The next 3 days moved slowly, but not for me. For me, the motel room was quiet, predictable, almost peaceful compared to what I'd just lived through. I kept the curtains half closed, watched the rain streak down the glass, and let myself breathe in a way I hadn't been able to since David got sick. But for Chloe? Those same 3 days were the biggest high she'd ever had in her life. And she had no idea her entire world was already collapsing under her feet. Mr. Davies updated me the way a surgeon would update a family during a long operation. Calm, factual, and without a hint of doubt. Every morning the motel phone rang once, and he gave me a short briefing. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening carefully like a man receiving weather reports for a storm only one person didn't know was coming. Day 1, he said. She's shopping. Shopping wasn't even the right word. Chloe attacked every luxury store in the city like she was collecting trophies. Bags from designers I couldn't even pronounce, jewelry boxes stacked in the back seat of David's car, shoes that cost more than the monthly salary of the people who handed them to her. She walked into every store with the same walk I'd seen the day she told me to leave, back straight, chin up, and that sharp smile that said she thought the world owed her something. She believes the money is hers to burn, Mr. Davies said. That's good. It means she didn't even look at the paperwork. By day 2, she wasn't shopping. She was redesigning the entire house. Not fixing things, not improving anything. Destroying. She hired a well-known designer, someone famous for taking warm, lived-in homes and turning them into cold, white echo chambers that look good in magazines but feel terrible to sit in. Every part of the house she touched like she wanted to erase David from it completely. Mr. Davies' investigator overheard her during the estate walkthrough. This library, she said. Get rid of it. All of it. The shelves. The books. The desk. It's depressing. She wanted a juice bar in the exact spot where my son used to read every morning before work. A juice bar. That woman wanted to bulldoze his mind, his soul, his sanctuary, and replace it with fruit smoothies. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel sick. Don't react, Mr. Davies reminded me. This is what David expected. Let her show the world who she really is. On day 3, she threw a party. Not a small gathering. A full-blown event. Caterers, music loud enough to shake the windows. People she'd never spoken to in her life before the money arrived. I imagined the house glowing with lights, glasses clinking, everyone toasting to her new fortune, while David's old office light stayed dark. While my chair in the living room sat empty. While the home he built with his hands hosted strangers celebrating her victory over a man who had already suspected all of this. The investigator told Mr. Davies what she said when someone asked where I was. And when Davies repeated it to me, I didn't feel anger. I felt something colder, something cleaner. She sighed dramatically and said, Robert just couldn't handle everything. He left, checked himself into a nursing home somewhere, I think. Poor man. He doesn't belong in this world anymore. She didn't even have the decency to keep her voice down. She said it like it was a punchline, and she thought that was the end of it. She thought she had the house, the money, the future. She thought she had buried me along with my son. But what she didn't know, what she never bothered to imagine, was that David had only given her enough rope to see what she would do with it, and she had tied the knot herself. On the morning of day 4, the first domino fell. She went to a cafe downtown, ordered a coffee, tried to pay with her new black card, the one she must have waved around like a badge of royalty. It declined. She laughed, made a joke, handed another card. Declined. A third. Declined again. According to the barista, she looked suspiciously at him, at the card machine, at the universe, anything except the truth. She called the bank immediately. The banker explained, calmly, professionally, that the accounts were under a temporary procedural hold requested by the executor of the estate. Her response could have shattered glass. She demanded access. She threatened lawsuits. She insisted she was the sole beneficiary. The banker simply said, I'm sorry, ma'am. Legally, my hands are tied. Next, the designer called her. The demolition crew had been turned away. A legal notice was attached to the front door. No structural changes allowed during probate. He sounded frustrated. She sounded like she was ready to burst into flames. Then came the car dealership. Her sports car, the bright red one she bragged about to half the city, was no longer hers. Her deposit was gone. The car was sold. She had 3 days to pay. She had waited 4. The last call she made that day was to Mr. Davies. The investigator replayed part of it for him later. Her voice was so frantic, so furious, so broken beneath all that rage that he said even he felt a moment of pity. She demanded to know why she couldn't touch the money, why everything was frozen, why the world suddenly felt like it was closing in around her. Mr. Davies listened quietly until she stopped screaming. Then he answered, in that perfectly composed way of his. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, "all actions I have taken are standard legal procedure to protect the estate during the evaluation period." "The what?" she snapped. "The 30-day fiduciary duty period outlined in the will," he said. "The one you agreed to by accepting the inheritance." That was the moment she stopped yelling. Because for the first time since my son died, she realized she might not actually know everything. "Where is Robert?" she finally asked. "I need to speak to him." Mr. Davies told her the truth. "I have not heard from him in days." And that was the moment she panicked. That was the moment she realized there might be a second half to the story she hadn't bothered to read. That was the moment her world finally tilted. And this wasn't even the fall. This was just the first crack. By the fifth morning in that motel, something in me had shifted. When I first arrived, the silence felt like humiliation. Now it felt like strategy. It felt like distance from the chaos, distance from the woman who threw me out, distance from the arrogance that had filled my son's home like toxic smoke. I sat by the motel window, drinking watery coffee and replaying Mr. Davies's words in my mind. David had built a system. Davies had activated it. And my job was simple. Disappear long enough for Chloe to reveal herself completely. And she had. By noon, the motel phone rang. I lifted the heavy plastic receiver, expecting a routine update. Instead, Mr. Davies said, "Robert, she's coming here." I didn't answer at first. I just let the words settle. Of course she was coming. She had tried everything else, her credit cards, the bank, designers, car dealerships, her new friends, even the neighbors she normally ignored. When all of that failed, she tried the one person she had thrown away, me. "Does she know I'm with you?" I asked. "No," he said. "She thinks I called you and you ignored me. As far as she's concerned, you've disappeared." "Good." Let her sit in the uncertainty she forced on me. "Where are you now?" he asked. "The motel," I said. "Same place." "Good," he replied. "It's time." Two simple words, but they felt like a switch flipping inside my chest. He sent a car for me, and I put on my best Navy suit, the same suit I wore to my son's wedding. I didn't wear it to impress anyone. I wore it because I wanted to walk into that building as a man with dignity, not as someone she tossed out like garbage. The ride downtown was quiet, nothing but the hum of tires on pavement. When I stepped out in front of the law office, the air felt cold and clean, like the world had reset itself. Mr. Davies was waiting when I stepped off the elevator. He looked at me with that steady, reassuring expression that lawyers develop after decades of watching people fall apart. "She's in the lobby," he said. "She looks shaken." "I'm not here to fight with her," I told him. "I'm here to honor David." He nodded once. "That's exactly why this works." He walked me to the small waiting room. I took a seat in the same leather chair I'd sat in years ago when David was young and building his first business. I opened a history book, letting the familiarity calm my thoughts. 30 minutes passed, maybe more. Then the door opened. I didn't look up immediately. I finished my paragraph first. Then I lifted my eyes. She stood in the doorway. For the first time since David's death, she didn't look powerful. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, her usually perfect posture slouched. She looked like a person who had spent days running in circles and had finally run out of ground to stand on. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for a receptionist, a lawyer, anyone who could fix her situation. Then she saw me, and she froze. It was like watching a glass statue crack from the inside. Her face drained of color. Her lips parted, trembling. "Robert," she breathed. Not a command, not a threat, a question, a terrified one. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. She stepped inside slowly, as if the floor might collapse under her. Then she forced herself into the performance I'm sure she rehearsed in the car. "Father," she said, trying to smile through the panic. I've been looking for you everywhere." I was so worried. The lie was almost pitiful. I didn't respond. I just watched her. Calm, steady, unmoved. And she knew. She knew right then that she had never been in control. Every cruel word she threw at me, every arrogant step she took through that house, every laugh she gave while tearing my son's memory down, it all came back to her in that single moment. She finally realized she had been taking a test without knowing it. And she had failed before it even started. That was when the office door opened again. Mr. Davies stood there, composed as ever. "Chloe." "Robert," he said. "It's time. Please follow me to the conference room." She swallowed hard. Her performance ended. Her last trace of confidence vanished. And whatever happened next would end her life as she knew it. The walk from the waiting room to the conference room felt like walking down a long, quiet hallway toward the truth my son left behind. I moved steadily, calmly. Chloe followed behind me, her heels clicking on the polished floor, each step slower than the last. She wasn't the queen of a $55 million empire anymore. She was a woman walking toward judgment. Inside the conference room, the table looked enormous. Dark wood, perfectly polished, lit by the soft, cold glow from the tall windows. Mr. Davies took his place at the head of the table. I sat on his right. Chloe sat on his left, though she practically sank into the chair, as if her own weight was too heavy to carry. Her hands trembled in her lap. She kept glancing at me, then away, then back again, like a child waiting for punishment. Mr. Davies folded his hands and began speaking with the calm, steady tone of a man about to dismantle someone's entire reality. Chloe, thank you for coming in, he said. We're here today because you found yourself unable to access any of the estate's assets. I understand this has caused you considerable frustration. Her jaw clenched. She tried to hide it, but her eyes flashed for a moment. The old arrogance was still in there, buried under fear. Yes, she said sharply. My accounts won't open, my cards keep declining, and I can't get anyone to release funds. This is illegal. I'm the sole heir. You were, Mr. Davies said quietly. But as executor of the estate, I must enforce every clause written in Mr. Peterson's will, including the ones you didn't pay attention to. She stiffened. What is that supposed to mean? Mr. Davies didn't answer. Instead, he opened a folder and slid the first document across the table. This is the will you heard last week, he said. You recall that it named you the beneficiary, but it also imposed a 30-day fiduciary duty, a requirement that you protect the immediate family and uphold the Peterson legacy. He tapped the highlighted paragraph. You violated that duty within 24 hours. Her lips parted. She blinked, confused, then the realization hit her like a slap. I didn't violate anything. You threw the only living member of the Peterson family into the rain, Mr. Davies said calmly. You ordered him out of the home and told him to go die in a dumpster. This is documented, witnessed, and submitted in a sworn statement. She whipped her head toward me, eyes wide. Robert, I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just looked at her. Her voice cracked. I was grieving. I didn't mean grief, Mr. Davies said, cutting her off gently. Does not exempt you from legal duty. And your actions triggered a clause in the will that your husband referred to as the character test. Her breath hitched. The what? Mr. Davies opened his briefcase and pulled out a single cream-colored envelope. Thick, heavy, sealed with dark blue wax stamped with the Peterson family ring. When she saw it, her whole body froze. Instinctively, she knew what it was. This, Mr. Davies said, placing it in the dead center of the table, is Caudle B, your husband's true and final instructions. It is the real will, and it becomes legally active only when the primary beneficiary fails their duty. Her chest started rising faster. David would never, he did, Mr. Davies said softly. Because he knew you. He knew exactly what would happen. Her hands covered her mouth. She looked like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Mr. Davies broke the wax seal. The crack of the seal echoed through the room like a gavel. He unfolded the single sheet inside and began reading. This is the final directive of David Peterson. In the event that my wife fails her fiduciary duty to my father or acts in a manner that betrays the Peterson legacy, the estate distribution shall be replaced in full by the following instructions. He read the first line. 1. All assets, financial, property, corporate shares, and holdings will transfer immediately into the Peterson Legacy Trust. Chloe shook her head, whispering, No. 2. Davies continued. The sole trustee and administrator of this trust will be my father, Robert Peterson. My breath caught in my throat. Even though I knew this was coming, hearing it spoken aloud felt like a wave crashing over me. Chloe looked like she'd been stabbed. 3. The purpose of the trust will be to support and expand a foundation providing technology and engineering education to underprivileged youth. Tears were rolling down her cheeks now. Real ones, but not from regret, from loss, from the sudden collapse of her dream life. And then Mr. Davies read the final line, the one that destroyed her completely. 4. To my wife, Chloe, I leave a monthly stipend of $2,000, contingent on verified full-time employment. She is permitted to live in the guest cottage. Any violation terminates support permanently. Her mouth fell open. A tiny, broken sound escaped her. Her world, the money, the power, the elite lifestyle she had tasted, crumbled in seconds. Davies folded the paper and placed it back inside the envelope. Then he looked at her gently, but firmly. This is your husband's true final wish, and it is legally binding. Chloe's eyes rolled back. She swayed. Then, without a single word, she collapsed sideways out of her chair and hit the carpet in a faint. The mighty queen of $100 million was gone, replaced by a woman who had just learned she was worth exactly $2,000 a month and a roof over her head. Nothing more. The final act of David's plan had begun. Chloe didn't stay unconscious for long. Mr. Davies had already called in his assistant, who quietly placed a glass of water on the table and stepped out again. When Chloe finally stirred, she blinked up at the ceiling like she wasn't sure where she was. Then her eyes found me, and everything rushed back at once. She sat up too fast, her breath shaky and sharp, the kind of breathing someone does when they're trying not to cry again. "Please, this can't be real," she whispered, her voice thin and trembling. "It's a mistake. It has to be. David would never leave me with nothing." Mr. Davies corrected her gently. "He did not leave you with nothing. He left you with a sustainable stipend, a home, and an opportunity to rebuild your life. What he did not leave you was the power to destroy his legacy." Her shoulders shook. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara down her cheek. It was the first time she had looked truly human, small, afraid, and stripped of every shield she used to hide behind. "I loved him," she said suddenly. "I loved David." Mr. Davies didn't react. "I didn't either. We both just waited." She broke down again. "I know I made mistakes. I was angry. I wasn't myself." She sniffed hard, desperate to find a version of herself that didn't sound like a villain. "I lost my temper when I told you to get out. I was grieving. I said awful things. But you could have talked to me. You could have told me I was hurting you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Her voice dropped lower, and she leaned forward in her chair, her hands clenched. "Robert, please. You know I'm not a bad person." I took a slow breath. Everything in me wanted to fill the silence with something. Anger, sympathy, memories. But silence was stronger. I had learned that in the waiting room. So I simply said, calmly and clearly, "You weren't grieving when you threw me out. You were celebrating." Her face crumpled. She covered her mouth again, her eyes refusing to meet mine. Mr. Davies kept everything moving with professional calm. "This isn't a negotiation," he said. "This is the activation of your husband's final, legally binding wishes. The trust has already been filed with the state. I've begun transferring ownership. The terms will not change." Chloe let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "I don't know how to live like this," she whispered. "I've never had a job. I never thought I'd have to." That was the most honest thing she'd said all day, and it was the heart of the problem. She had married my son not for love, but for escape, from responsibility, from work, from adulthood. David had seen it. He had prepared for it. And now she was face to face with the life she had spent years avoiding. She turned to me, tears spilling down her cheeks, desperation written all over her. "Please," she begged. "Robert, please don't let them do this. I can't survive like this. I don't know how." For the first time since she entered the building, I leaned forward. "Chloe," I said softly, "you should have thought of that before you told me to die in a dumpster." She broke. Completely. A full-body collapse into sobbing, ugly and uncontrollable, the kind that shakes the whole chest. Mr. Davies waited patiently, hands folded, letting the storm pass. When she finally quieted, he slid a final packet of papers toward her. "These are the terms you'll need to sign," he said. "They outline the stipend, the requirements, and your housing arrangement. The sooner you sign, the sooner the support begins." She stared at the documents with red, swollen eyes. "And if I don't sign?" Davies didn't blink. "Then you will receive nothing. No stipend, no residence, no allowance, no access to any of David's assets. The trust will proceed without you." Chloe's breath caught. She knew she had no leverage. She knew she had burned every bridge, every chance, every ounce of goodwill. After a long, shaking moment, she reached for the pen. When she signed her name, it looked nothing like the confident signature she used on party invoices and luxury contracts. The letters were small, fragile, defeated. When it was done, She pressed the pen to the table and lowered her head, her hair falling like a curtain to hide her face. Mr. Davies collected the documents. His voice gentled slightly. The guest house will be inspected this week. You can move in tomorrow. I suggest you begin searching for full-time employment immediately. Your stipend begins on your first day of work. She nodded without lifting her head. Her voice was barely audible. Can I go now? Yes, Davies said. You may. She stood on unsteady legs, keeping her eyes on the floor. She didn't look at me, not out of anger, but out of shame, a quiet acknowledgement that she had been the architect of her own undoing. She walked out of the conference room, out of the law office, and out of the last illusion she had about who held the power. When the door finally clicked shut behind her, the room felt strangely quiet. Mr. Davies set the signed papers into a neat stack and looked at me over his glasses. Your son, he said softly, planned every moment of this with absolute clarity. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He was right. David's hand was in every step, guiding this moment from beyond the grave. Not out of vengeance, but out of love. After a long moment, Mr. Davies added, She will rebuild her life, Robert. Slowly. Harder than she imagines. But honestly, that may be the first real life she's ever lived. I exhaled, long and steady. What now? Mr. Davies smiled, small, tired, but genuine. Now, he said, you get your son's house back, and you start building the future he wanted. It was the first time since the funeral that something warm, something like hope, rose in my chest. Leaving the lawyer's office that afternoon didn't feel like stepping out of a battle. It felt like stepping out of a fog. For the first time since the burial, I could breathe without feeling like something heavy was sitting on my chest. The building's glass doors slid shut behind me, and I walked into the cool afternoon air with a sense of quiet clarity I hadn't felt in months. The driver Mr. Davies arranged was waiting near the curb. When he opened the door, I hesitated for a moment. Not because I doubted the plan, not because I felt guilt, but because I knew where this ride would take me. Back to the house. Back to the place where David and I spent decades building something with our own hands. Back to the place where I was told to get out and die alone in a dumpster. I let out a slow breath and stepped inside. The drive was quiet. The world outside passed in soft blurs of trees, storefronts, familiar streets. I found myself thinking of David, not his death, but moments when he was alive. Times he came to me with new ideas, times we argued about paint colors, times he brought Chloe home with bright, hopeful eyes, believing she was someone she never turned out to be. I wondered how long he had known who she truly was, how long he had carried that weight in silence. When we reached the driveway, the house stood exactly as I remembered it, grand, beautiful, and strangely cold. The place that had once felt warm with life now felt like a museum exhibit, waiting for someone to breathe air into its halls again. The driver walked around and helped with my suitcase. I thanked him quietly. He nodded, got back in the car, and pulled away, leaving me alone in the long stretch of driveway. I stood there for a moment, staring up at the front door. This time it wasn't locked. This time no one was waiting on the other side to throw me out. This time the house was mine. Still, I knocked. It felt right too. After a moment, the door opened just a crack. It was a house staff member, someone David had hired years ago to help with maintenance. His eyes widened the moment he saw me, and then they softened. Mr. Peterson, he said, stepping aside immediately. Welcome home. 2 simple words. But they hit me harder than Chloe's screaming insults ever had. I walked inside. The smell was the same. Fresh wood, clean floors, a hint of cedar from the hallway closet. But the energy was different. Chloe had tried to erase the heart of this place, but she failed. The soul of the home David and I built was still here. In the library, I placed my hand on the dark oak shelves. They felt solid, familiar, strong. As I traced my fingers across the spines of the books David loved, it felt like touching memories preserved in time. One of the staff members approached me quietly. Sir, she said gently, we kept everything just the way it was. We didn't let them touch this room. I turned to her. Thank you. Those 2 words held more gratitude than she could ever know. I spent that evening walking through the house one room at a time. Not rushing. Not searching for anything specific. Just reacquainting myself with the space that had once been mine. The family photos Chloe tried to throw away, the staff saved them. The little dent in the hallway baseboard from when David dropped the toolbox? Still there. The worn patch on the stair rail from years of use. Still smooth under my hand. The house felt like it was waiting. Not for Chloe. Not for parties. Not for expensive furniture or pointless displays of luxury, but for purpose. For me, when the sun began to set, I found myself back in the library again. I sat in David's old leather chair, the one he used when reading late at night. I closed my eyes and let the room settle around me. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I simply breathed. For the first time since he died, I felt something that almost resembled peace. It didn't last long. A soft knock sounded at the doorframe. One of the younger staff members stood there holding a small package. "This was left for you," he said. "Mr. Davies' office dropped it off a few hours ago." I thanked him and waited until he left to open it. Inside was a folder with a single sheet of paper on top, an official transfer of ownership document for the entire estate. Beneath it was a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in David's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Short, simple, direct, but written with the certainty only a son who knows his father's heart can write. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means everything happened exactly as I feared and exactly as I planned. I'm sorry, not because of what she did, but because I couldn't protect you from it while I was alive. But I know you, and I know that when it mattered most, you'd protect our home, our history, and everything we built together. Build something good with what I left you. Build something that outlives all of this. I love you, Dad. David." I sat there for a long while, the letter resting on my lap, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the lights. His words didn't break me. They strengthened me. They gave me direction. They gave me purpose. He didn't leave me $100 million. He left me a mission, and I was going to fulfill it. That night, for the first time since the funeral, I slept in my own bed. And in the morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I woke early the next morning, long before the sun rose. The house was quiet in a way I hadn't heard for years. Not the cold silence Chloe brought with her, but the soft, restful quiet of a home waiting to be lived in again. I made coffee in the old machine David and I installed ourselves. It sputtered and hissed exactly the way it always had. I stood there for a moment, hands wrapped around the warm mug, looking out the kitchen window toward the backyard. The tree David planted when he got his first big contract still stood tall, its branches reaching toward the sky. That tree was a promise, a symbol of growing something from nothing. He had done that with his company. Now it was my turn to do the same with the legacy he left behind. By 8 o'clock, I was sitting in Mr. Davies' office again. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a look that said he knew exactly why I was there. "You've read his letter," he said, closing the door behind us. "Every word," I answered. He nodded and led me to the conference table. On it was a thick folder labeled the Peterson Legacy Trust. I took a deep breath and opened it. Inside were carefully organized sections: foundation planning, scholarship program structures, investment strategies, and a list of trusted partners David had handpicked before he died. The detail was astounding. He didn't just leave me an inheritance. He left a blueprint, a roadmap, a mission he expected me to finish for him. "Your son was one of the smartest men I ever worked with," Mr. Davies said quietly. "But this was the most impressive thing he ever did." For the next 2 hours, we went through everything, line by line, page by page. It was overwhelming, but not in a bad way. It felt like stepping into a pair of shoes I'd spent my whole life preparing to wear. When we finished, Mr. Davies closed the folder and folded his hands. "All that remains," he said, "is the final administrative matter regarding Chloe." I leaned back slightly. "Her stipend?" "Yes," he said. "She will receive exactly what David specified, and not a cent more. But she needs to hear it from you." That was his final instruction. I exhaled slowly. I had known this was coming. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating her. It was about closure, about putting an end to a chapter she had tried to write on her terms. "When?" I asked. "Today," he said. "She'll be here at noon." I nodded. I spent the next few hours back at the house, straightening things that didn't need straightening, pacing hallways that felt too long, rereading David's letter until I had memorized every curve of every letter. At 5 minutes to noon, I was back in the conference room. Not as a guest, not as a victim, but as the trustee of my son's entire life's work. When the door opened, Chloe entered slowly. She looked drained, as if every ounce of color had been washed from her face. Her designer clothes didn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She didn't look rich. She didn't look powerful. She looked scared and small. She sat across from me, her hands shaking slightly. "Robert," she whispered, "please, just tell me what's happening." There was no fire in her voice anymore. No venom. No arrogance. Just fear. Mr. Davies began with the legal explanation, the stipends, the employment requirement, the housing arrangement in the guest cottage. Chloe kept nodding, but I could tell she wasn't absorbing anything. Her eyes kept drifting back to me, as if she still hoped I would suddenly intervene. Finally, she spoke. Is this really what he wanted? She asked in a small voice. I lifted my chin, steady and calm. This was his plan, I said. Every word. Every detail. She swallowed hard. Then why? It was such a simple question. And such a complicated one. I took a moment before answering. Because he hoped you'd prove him wrong, I said. But you didn't. She blinked, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide by looking away. I didn't know she trailed off, unable to finish. I let the silence fill the room before I spoke again, slow, calm, firm. You threw me out of the house he built for both of us, I said. You tried to erase every piece of him that didn't serve your image. And when you told me to go die in a dumpster, that wasn't grief speaking. That was who you truly are. Her breath trembled. Her shoulders shook. I made a mistake, she said softly, her voice breaking. No, I said, my tone steady. David gave you a test. And you answered it. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. So that's it, she whispered. This is the rest of my life. Only if you choose it to be, I said. David didn't sentence you. He gave you structure. He gave you a chance to become someone better. What you do with that chance is up to you. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly, painfully, but with something that looked like acknowledgement. Maybe even acceptance. Mr. Davies slid a final document toward her. Sign here, he said. This acknowledges the terms of the trust and your acceptance of the conditions. Her hand trembled as she signed. When it was done, she placed the pen down gently, as if closing a chapter she could never reopen. I stood up. She did too. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at me. Then she whispered one final thing. I really did love him. I studied her face carefully. There was no manipulation in her eyes this time. No calculation. Just a raw, painful truth buried under years of greed. I know, I said quietly. But love isn't just a feeling. It's how you choose to act. She lowered her gaze, nodded once, and left the room. I didn't watch her go. I simply exhaled, slow and deep, letting the weight of the moment settle. David's plan was complete. The chapter was closed. And now, it was time to begin the work that mattered, the work he entrusted to me. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Not because of worry or grief or that heavy sense of being lost that had followed me around since the day David died. No, this time I woke with purpose. Real purpose. The kind that settles deep in your chest and makes you feel 10 years younger. I walked through the house slowly, taking in every room with new eyes. The spaces felt different now, not empty, not haunted, not tainted by Chloe's brief attempt to erase everything. They felt like mine again. More importantly, they felt like David's again. I paused at the library doors and placed my hand on the smooth oak. The same oak he and I had sanded together, coated, and installed one weekend when he was 22 and convinced we could build an entire house ourselves if we just had enough YouTube tutorials. I smiled at the memory and stepped inside. The air smelled the same as it always had. Books, dust, old wood, and something warm that I never could describe. But the room no longer felt frozen in time. It felt like it was waiting. Waiting for voices, for footsteps, for new ideas. It felt ready to be alive again. That afternoon, Mr. Davies arrived, along with 2 representatives from a nonprofit advisory board. They came with laptops, folders, and that unmistakable energy of people who were about to build something meaningful. We spread out across the long table in the library and began turning my son's plans into reality. The Peterson Legacy Trust would fund programs in coding, engineering, AI research, and robotics. We would partner with schools in low-income areas. We would provide scholarships for kids who had big dreams but no resources. And we would build a center, one that carried David's name proudly on its front doors. For hours, I listened, asked questions, shared stories about David, and wrote notes. I felt awake, lit up, like someone had plugged a cable straight into the center of my chest and turned the power back on. We worked until the sun set behind the backyard trees, painting the room in warm orange light. When the advisors left and the house grew quiet again, I stayed in the library alone. I opened one of David's favorite science fiction books, its spine worn, corners bent, a few coffee stains on the pages. I ran my fingers over his old handwriting in the margins. He'd want this, I whispered. For the first time in a long time, my voice didn't crack when I said it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I met with architects, school administrators, donors, grant writers. Every day had structure. Every day had momentum. Every day had meaning. The grief was still there. Grief doesn't disappear, but it had changed shape. Instead of weighing me down, it pushed me forward. It reminded me why the work mattered. At night, I would walk the halls of the house and feel David there with me. Not like a ghost, not like a memory, but like a presence, like a warm hand resting lightly on my shoulder. And then, one morning, something unexpected happened. I was at the grocery store, a place I hadn't visited much during the worst of everything. I turned down the aisle for cereal and froze. Because standing there, wearing a green apron and holding a price scanner, was Chloe. She had her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, no expensive clothes. Her shoulders were rounded, not sharp with confidence, but soft with exhaustion. She didn't see me at first. She was focused on scanning barcodes and placing price tags neatly on the shelf. Then she looked up. Our eyes met. She froze. The scanner slipped slightly in her hand. Her lips parted just a little, like she might speak, but no words came out. I didn't walk over to her. I didn't glare or gloat or say anything cruel. I just gave her a small, polite nod, the kind of nod you give to a stranger you once vaguely knew. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. She tried to blink away. She straightened her apron and looked down, pretending to adjust the shelf labels, though her hands were trembling. I walked past her without another word, pushing my cart slowly down the aisle. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Certainly not pity. Peace. True peace. Because in that moment, seeing her there, working honestly for the first time in her life, living within boundaries she couldn't manipulate, I finally understood something. David wasn't trying to punish her. He was trying to teach her, to force her to stand on her own 2 feet. And maybe, just maybe, she would become better for it. Maybe she wouldn't. But that wasn't my burden anymore. Outside, the sky was bright and blue. I loaded my groceries into the trunk and sat behind the wheel for a long moment. Then I smiled. A real smile. The kind I hadn't felt since the day before my son died. The foundation's first public announcement was scheduled for the following week. We were going to unveil the plans for the new tech center. And I knew, when I stood on that stage, speaking to hundreds of kids who deserved every chance my son wanted them to have, I would feel him there beside me. Proud, at peace, and finally free of the woman who tried to steal his legacy. But more than that, I realized something else. I wasn't just carrying out his last wishes. I was becoming the man he believed I already was. And there was no greater honor than that. 3 weeks later, the blueprints for the David Peterson Tech Center arrived at the house. They came rolled up in 2 large tubes, sealed with stamps from the architectural firm. When I unrolled them across the dining table, the sight almost took my breath away. The building wasn't just functional. It was beautiful. Large windows, open spaces, classrooms filled with natural light. A main hall with a glass atrium that reached upward like an open hand. And right at the entrance, in clean, bold lettering, David Peterson Tech Scholars Center. My son's name. Not attached to a company, a product, or a bank account, but to a place where kids would learn, build, grow, and dream. I ran my palm over the blueprint as though it were a living thing. "You'd like this, son," I murmured. And I knew he would. The next day, I visited the construction site. It was still just an empty lot at the edge of the city, but when I stood there, boots in the dirt, jacket zipped against the wind, I could already imagine the building rising out of the ground. Workers moved around the site, measuring, marking, preparing the foundation. One of the project leads walked me through the layout. He pointed at the ground and described labs, 3D printers, robotics bays, study rooms, and even a small auditorium where students would present their work. As he spoke, the future began to take shape around us. And I felt something deep inside me settle, like a heavy stone finally finding its rightful place. That night, back at the house, I stood in the doorway of the library. The room was softly lit, warm, and full of quiet life again. Stacks of binders and architectural documents sat on David's old reading table. 2 laptops were open from earlier meetings. And sitting on the corner of the desk was the photograph I always returned to, David on our hiking trip, smiling under the sun. But there was something new there. A thin silver frame next to the photo, holding a printed copy of the Trust's mission statement. I had asked Mr. Davies to print it for me because it felt important to keep it where I could see it every day. It read, "The Peterson Legacy Trust exists to provide opportunity where there is none and hope where it is lacking. It honors the belief that knowledge lifts people higher and that no dream is ever wasted." I traced the edges of the frame with my thumb. "You built something that will outlive us both," I whispered. In the following days, preparations for the foundation's launch grew bigger. Meetings with city officials, educators, donors. Interviews with local newspapers. Discussions with technology companies who wanted to partner with us. It felt strange at first. Me, a retired history professor, suddenly moving through rooms filled with tech executives and nonprofit leaders. But every time I doubted myself, I thought of David. He had trusted me with this. He had chosen me, not as a figurehead or a sentimental gesture, but because he believed I could carry this through. And that belief became a kind of fuel. One afternoon, after a long meeting, I drove to the old neighborhood where David grew up. The small house we lived in back then was still there. Same porch, same old fence we had built together when he was 15. A young family lived there now, and children's toys were scattered across the yard. I didn't go to the door. I just stood by the sidewalk and looked at the house. It reminded me where we had started, how far he had gone, how far we had both come. A single tear slid down my cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from gratitude. Later that week, I returned to the grocery store for a few things. I wasn't avoiding the place, but I wasn't eager to have another run-in with Chloe either. Yet life has its own odd timing. I turned a corner, and there she was again, restocking shelves, scanning items, wearing the same green apron with her name tag. But this time, something was different. She was moving slower, carefully, as though she were tired, but not defeated. More like someone learning how to live a new life one small task at a time. She didn't see me at first. When she eventually glanced up and noticed me, her expression changed, not with panic or humiliation like before, but with something closer to acceptance. She gave me a small nod, a quiet, respectful acknowledgement. Not an apology, not a plea, just a simple recognition of the truth. I nodded back. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. I realized then that she wasn't my problem anymore. She wasn't my responsibility, my adversary, or my burden. She was simply a person living with the consequences of her choices. And I was living with the strength of mine. Back at home, I walked into the library again, and for the first time in months, it truly felt whole. Not because it had been restored, but because it had a future. And so did I. That evening, as the sun set and cast long shadows across the hardwood floor, I sat at the desk and opened my notebook. Not to write a report or a plan, but to write something simple, something that had been forming in my mind ever since the will was read. I wrote, "The greatest victory is not destroying someone who wronged you. It is building something they can never touch." I closed the notebook and placed it beside the photo. The house felt peaceful that night, quiet, warm, and purposeful. And as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I knew the story wasn't over yet. The biggest moment was still coming, the public unveiling of David's true legacy. And the world was finally going to see what he had left behind. The day of the grand opening arrived on a bright Saturday morning, the kind of morning that feels as if the world itself is giving you a blessing. The David Peterson Tech Scholars Center stood tall and gleaming, its wide glass entrance catching the sunlight and throwing long beams across the freshly paved courtyard. Banners hung from the light poles, each one with my son's name printed in bold letters. A crowd gathered, students, parents, teachers, city officials, reporters, and people from the companies that had donated equipment. It felt surreal, looking at all these faces and realizing they were here because of my son, and because of the quiet plan he built long before he took his last breath. Mr. Davies was beside me, guiding me through the flow of the event, and I found myself shaking hands, smiling, nodding, accepting condolences, accepting praise. But in the middle of the noise and the tapping microphones and the murmuring crowd, I only had one thought. David, you did it. When it was time for me to speak, I walked to the podium at the center of the courtyard. The microphone picked up a soft echo as I adjusted it. The crowd hushed. I took a breath, steady and full. "Thank you all for being here," I began. My voice didn't shake. It didn't break. "My name is Robert Peterson. I'm the father of the man whose name is on this building. A man who believed that opportunity should never be limited to wealth or circumstance." I looked out at the students, some leaning forward eagerly, some shy, some holding notebooks as if they were already dreaming of what they would create here. David was brilliant, I continued. But the most extraordinary thing about him wasn't his success. It was his belief that intelligence is everywhere, that potential is everywhere, that dreams are not restricted by income, but unlocked by access. A soft wind moved through the courtyard, rustling the banners. This center, I said, placing a hand on the podium, is not a monument to loss. It is a monument to possibility. A place where anyone, no matter where they come from, can learn, build, and imagine something bigger. Behind me, the glass doors reflected the sky. In the reflection, for just a moment, I thought I saw him. My son. Young, smiling, proud. David believed that justice is not only about correcting wrongs, I said, but about creating something right, creating something good, something lasting. The applause that rose after that wasn't loud or explosive. It was warm. It wrapped around me like a gentle hand. After the ribbon was cut and the photos were taken, people moved inside to tour the classrooms. I stayed behind for a moment, standing alone by the podium. I needed a breath, needed to absorb what had just happened. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, slowly. It was Chloe. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes or expensive shoes. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, and her hair was pulled back in a plain ponytail. She stood a few yards away, unsure if she should come closer. Her hands were clasped nervously in front of her. Her expression wasn't angry or defiant. It was softer, smaller, human. "Robert," she said quietly. I didn't move toward her. I didn't move away. I simply waited. "I heard about the opening," she said. "I wanted to see it. Just for a moment." I nodded once. Not permission, not invitation, just acknowledgement. She glanced at the building, her eyes lingering on the sign with my son's name. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "He would have loved this." For the first time since everything began, there was no arrogance in her voice. No entitlement. Just truth. She hesitated again, her voice barely above a breath. I'm sorry." I believed her, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because forgiveness wasn't even the point anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She looked down at her hands, swallowed hard, and nodded as though accepting something she had known deep down all along. "I should go," she said. "This isn't my place anymore." She started to turn, but I spoke, calm, even, without bitterness. "Chloe." She stopped. "Look back. Work hard," I said. "Build something real." Her eyes softened. She gave the smallest, saddest nod, then walked away. No drama, no confrontation, just a quiet ending to a chapter that had never belonged to her in the first place. I stood there for another minute, letting the moment settle, then walked inside the building. The sound hit me immediately. Laughter, excitement, keyboards clicking, students talking over each other with ideas. Life. Real, vibrant life. The library inside the center was modeled after my son's library at home. Dark wood, soft lighting, rows of books alongside rows of modern computers. It felt like a perfect blend of past and future. I stood in the doorway, watching two young boys argue playfully about a line of code on their screen. A girl next to them was adjusting a small robot she had built. Another was sketching an app layout on a tablet. This right here, was my son's voice echoing through the world long after he was gone. I walked to the center of the room, placed my hand on one of the wooden tables, and closed my eyes. "Thank you, David," I thought, "for planning ahead, for trusting me, for believing that the best revenge is not vengeance at all, but purpose." When I opened my eyes, the future felt brighter than it had in years. Not because the pain was gone, but because the purpose was stronger. The day ended with a simple sunset. The sky glowed orange and gold as families walked out of the center with their children, talking excitedly about classes and projects. I locked up the building, turned off the lights, and stepped outside. The air was warm, peaceful. I took one last look at the sign, David Peterson Tech Scholars Center, and felt a pride so deep it was almost overwhelming. My son's legacy was alive, and it would stay alive long after I was gone. As I walked to my car, I realized something important. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it's the steady, unstoppable unfolding of a plan that was written with love, not anger. The greatest justice my son ever delivered wasn't taking anything away from Chloe. It was giving something incredible to the world. And I was honored, truly honored, to be the one carrying it forward. The story ends here, but the legacy doesn't. Not his. Not mine. and not the legacy of the students who will walk through those doors. If you've listened this far, thank you. And remember, sometimes the most powerful move you can make is the quiet one. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below, and don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.